Welcome to Look Ahead Radio with Tom Arms and Lockwood Phillips.
Every Wednesday evening, we have joining us Tom Arms of Look Ahead Radio, and of course also LookAheadNews.com. Look Ahead Radio, of course, is heard Friday evenings here on the talk station and also radio stations around the world, and growing in his area of exposure. As a matter of fact, I know that he has recently been the subject of a conversation with folks in Raleigh, and I'm looking forward to hearing something about that, probably if not on air, off air. But every evening here, every Wednesday evening here on Viewpoints, we have Tom Arms of Look Ahead Radio and LookAheadNews.com. And before I get started, just make mention of this. You may want to just sign up for that Foreign Affairs newsletter at LookAheadNews.com. No obligation, no money, and a great read and listen, I might add. And, of course, we tease it with our interviews every Wednesday evening with Tom here on Viewpoints. The numbers, if you'd like to join us, 252 area code 247-7282. That's 247-7282. 910 area code 353-4674. That's 353-4674. Toll free 800-818-2255 via email at viewpoints with an S, viewpointsradio@hotmail.com, via Facebook at Viewpoints on the Talk Station. We have so much to talk about this evening, Tom. It's going to be difficult to get it all in, but, well, we'll start off with a good evening to you, and how's the weather in London?
The weather in London is lovely. It's a bit damp, but the rest of Europe is under snow. It's frozen, especially southern Europe. Greece, Italy are under several feet of snow.
Global climate change. We call it winter here in the United States.
Yeah. In Moscow, by the way, they had the coldest Christmas in 70 years.
Well, that means that there was a colder Christmas before that. So Moscow's having a little chill as well. As a matter of fact, we've got to talk about the chilled relations with the current administration in the U.S. and the Russian president, and also possibly other national affairs with Russia. I've got to start off the program with you to ask first, have you been paying attention to the events in the United States? We can talk first about the president's speech last night, but also the unraveling of for want of a better description, a major fake news story related to President-elect Donald Trump. You may not be aware of the events related to BuzzFeed, but let's start with the president's speech last night. We're going
to talk about the farewell speech, the hello press conference, the BuzzFeed, the Kirchner,
we've got it. We've got so much. About. By the way, what was the response, the reaction to the air quotes on this one farewell speech, which I didn't think was so much a farewell speech, but that's my observation. What is the feeling there in Europe?
It was very well received. I think Nick Bryant at the BBC, who wrote an analysis of it, summed it up quite well when he said it was one of the most elegantly worded speeches he'd ever heard.
Okay.
And I think that is how people view Obama as elegant. Now, the BBC also graded the speech, not his speech. They graded the Obama administration. Mm-hmm. And I thought you might be interested. I made a note of the marks, the grades that they gave the Obama administration in various categories. For instance, in healthcare, they gave him a B+.
Okay.
They gave him an A- on the environment. They gave him a C- on foreign affairs. They gave him an A- on the economy, and they gave him an F. They failed him when it came to party politics and helping his own party.
Right. Well, that as a matter of fact, he's even acknowledged that the fact that he hasn't helped his party. Folks did not see that last night as a possible campaign presentation. I mean, the cheering crowds and his gave him almost an effort to give his curriculum vitae for a possible run for the president second time around. That's happened, as a matter of fact, in Russia, interestingly enough. So is there a feeling that maybe...
No,
go ahead.
I don't think that's been raised at all here.
Okay.
I mean, he is young, he's 55.
Right.
So, if he were to, I would think it's possible. He leaves with a very high approval rating.
Mm-hmm. Right.
57%, I believe. So I should think it's possible. He will obviously feel a bit embittered that his legacy is going to be probably torn to shreds.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least not legacy, but what he sees as 8 years of hard work is going to be thrown out the window, and he is probably still the number one Democrat in the country.
No question about that. The Democrats. We've chatted about this several times with other callers. The Democrat Party right now is lacking in, to use the analogy of sports, a deep bench, let alone a bench at all. All right, let's talk now about the events of last evening and today that unraveled related to BuzzFeed and President-elect Donald Trump. Has that been getting much play there in the European press?
It has, but it hasn't really been analyzed yet. I've spoken to a few people, and they are not very pleased with BuzzFeed or CNN.
Not very pleased.
The general consensus here is, this is a story which has been doing the rounds for a long time. We get stories here doing the rounds in the UK which never get published because they can't be substantiated. There's usually a reason they can't be substantiated. You don't publish them because, and you don't put out a story saying, here's the story which we can't substantiate.
Right.
That's...
But it's nothing different than just a spurious rumor. We just we can't substantiate it, but here's the rumor. All right.
What they're saying is we can't substantiate it, but as we all know, there's no smoke without fire.
Exactly.
Which is not the way to carry on the business of journalism. And I'm very surprised. BuzzFeed is actually a very reputable, or fairly reputable. And CNN is very reputable.
Past tense. Past tense.
No, I don't think you can judge a news organization on the basis of one story in its entire history.
Well,
I think that would be a mistake.
Here's a quick question for you, Tom, before we go to the break, because I want to get onto this other issues. We've got so much to talk about. Hopefully we'll get to other items as well. Tom Arms, of course, of Look Ahead Radio and LookAheadNews.com. I just want to commend to you that website. We have so many other things to get to. We've talked about Jared Kushner and Meryl Streep as well. But the fact that this did unravel so quickly, did it overwhelm the story or has it taken some of the air out of the story associated with President Obama's, air quotes here, farewell speech?
No,
it did not. Okay, we're gonna get back.
It didn't. It just.
Okay, I want to get back.
Everything's being broadcast live here, by the way. The Trump press conference was broadcast live.
Okay.
Obama's farewell speech was broadcast live.
Wow. And that was early in the morning for you.
It's all being reported in full, word for word, live broadcasts, the whole lot.
Interesting. Tom Arms of LookAheadNews.com and, of course, Look Ahead Radio. Stay tuned.
Look Ahead Radio will return in just a moment.
This is Tom Arms with LookAheadNews.com's World Report for the week beginning the 16th of January. LookAheadNews.com broadcasts tomorrow's news today so that you can plan to participate. Next Friday is Inauguration Day in Washington. Donald Trump takes the oath of office, followed by celebratory balls and parades. There will also be mass protests, including marijuana smoke-ins, and a women's march on Washington on Saturday. The inauguration of the new pro-Russian Bulgarian President Rumen Rudolph on Sunday will be a relatively quiet affair, as will be the first ever meeting in the German town of Koblenz on Saturday of the European political parties opposed to immigration to the EU. The fighting in Syria, which sparked off the immigration tsunami, will top the agenda when EU foreign ministers hold their regular meeting in Brussels on Monday. The following day, the European Parliament elects a new president to replace Martin Schulz. Brexit is on the agenda at the European Court of Justice on Thursday, when the British Overseas Territory of Gibraltar asked the court to make an exception for them and allow Gibraltar to stay in the European Union. Next week is also the annual Davos World Economic Forum. Thousands of political, business and media luminaries will rub shoulders. Representing the U.S. is Secretary of State John Kerry on his final foreign trip before clearing out his desk. The French Socialist Party will hold its first round of presidential primaries on Sunday. Conspicuous by his absence will be President François Hollande, who is in Colombia. And finally, on Saturday it is World Hug Day. Perhaps inaugural protesters and celebrants can be persuaded to join in a group hug. And that was next week's World News Today from LookAheadNews.com, so that you can plan to participate in the world around you. Stay tuned after this message for the expanded LookAheadNews.com World Analysis.
They say the best things in life are free. So, hey, why are we paying so much for our basic information and entertainment needs? The average cable TV bill has more than doubled in the last 10 years. The price of movie tickets keeps going up. So, exactly what is free today anyway? Well, you're listening to it. Local radio. Support the advertisers that support this radio station. And keep listening. We won't send you a bill. There are still some things you just shouldn't have to pay for.
This is Tom Arms of LookAheadNews.com's expanded world analysis for the week beginning the 16th of January. LookAheadNews.com broadcasts tomorrow's news today so that you can plan to participate. It's Inauguration Week in America, and it will be like no other in history. There will be the traditional swearing-in of Donald Trump on the steps of the Capitol building, preceded by the pre-ball and inaugural concert, and followed by the inaugural parade and ball. But at the same time, 1 million-plus demonstrators are expected to descend on the American Capitol to protest against the installation of Donald Trump as president. Protests continue the day after, when women's groups from across America converge on Washington for a march led by Hollywood luminaries. A relatively quiet affair will be the inauguration in Sofia on Sunday of Bulgaria's Major General Rumen Rudolph. Rudolph was elected on a strong pro-Russian and populist platform, which analysts say could have been affected by Trump's own pro-Putin campaign. Neighboring Moldova also elected a pro-Russian president, Igor Dodon, on the same day as Rudolph. Another sign of the populism sweeping the West is the first ever Europe-wide meeting on Saturday in Koblenz of the leaders of EU political parties opposed to immigration, with party leaders from the Netherlands, France, Germany, Austria, Belgium and Italy. The fighting in Syria, which sparked off the immigration tsunami, will be the main topic on the agenda when EU foreign ministers hold their regular meeting in Brussels on Monday. The big question is whether to support the proposed Russian ceasefire and peace talks. Gibraltar's economy, and that of the surrounding Spanish hinterland, is totally dependent on access to the EU. On Thursday, Gibraltar goes to the European Court of Justice to ask for a ruling that will make the British Overseas Territory a Brexit exception. If they win, it could set a precedent for similar demands from Scotland and Northern Ireland. In France on Sunday, it is the first round of primary elections for the socialist candidate for the French presidential elections in April. Conspicuous by his absence from both the ballot papers and the country will be French President François Hollande. He will be in Colombia drumming up Latin American business and inspecting FARC demobilization sites. The Davos World Economic Summit, the biggest informal gathering of politicians, journalists and businessmen, is next week. The United States will be represented by Secretary of State John Kerry, who is on his final foreign trip before returning to Washington to clear his desk before the inauguration. And that was next week's News Today from LookAheadNews.com, so that you can plan to participate in the world around you. Stay tuned for Viewpoints Around the World with myself and Lockwood Phillips.
Welcome back to Look Ahead Radio. Here is Lockwood Phillips.
Viewpoints Around the World with Tom Arms of Look Ahead News. LookAheadNews.com is his newsletter I would commend to you, as well as, of course, listening to the radio programs here and radio stations around the country. Tom, we broke it up a few moments ago talking about, well, President Obama and now President-elect Donald Trump and his news report earlier today, his press conference. Did you happen to watch it?
I did.
And what was your thoughts?
Well, I'll tell you my sum total of my thoughts is that this man is starting with a shed load of troubles. He's really starting on the back foot.
Okay, what problems specifically?
Well, he's under attack over everything.
And some of them spurious attacks, as we discovered with BuzzFeed.
They may be spurious, but the point is that he is under attack. I've never known an administration to start in such inauspicious circumstances.
I would agree with you on that, and I find it interesting.
And that's just, it's going to carry on. It's not going to get better. It's going to get worse.
What's the opinion?
He's going to have great problems trying to do his job.
I'm curious, what is the view of the average European, the folks there in the United Kingdom or France, Germany? What's the opinion of Donald Trump so far?
It hasn't changed from the last time you asked me. They don't like him.
Okay, next question. Let's talk about the reaction and response about President Putin.
Having said that, wait a minute, I should qualify that. The people in the western part of Europe don't like him.
Okay.
The people, a lot of people in the eastern part of Europe do.
Okay.
And I'm going to come to that. There's a few people in particular I'm going to come to later.
All right, let's talk about the response and reaction to his comments related to President Putin, the fact that he feels that the world politic and world relations might actually benefit from a closer relationship between the two leaders. What is the opinion there in Europe and the UK?
The opinion is that Putin has shown himself totally untrustworthy and a liar. So how can you really conduct serious negotiations and work with a man whose credibility, as far as the West Europeans are concerned, is zero or negative?
The other aspect of this is he has led in the field of the Middle East. We now have the Syrian supposedly peace there.
And he's been branded as a war criminal.
So have other world leaders, but at least he is someone to deal with. Apparently, as you actually pointed out, foreign affairs with the Obama administration, many feel that he obviously failed there in light of of course, the attempted Russian reset. Okay, so we've watched the news release. We've gotten the remarks from you related to how the European electorate, the average European is visualizing Donald Trump. The next question goes to issues associated with his cabinet. Are people paying attention to the cabinet? And is that of interest, the hearings related to, say, for example, the Attorney General and now potential Secretary of State?
Yes, and again, those are being broadcast live.
Okay, they are. Wow. So this is high dudgeon for the European community. Let's talk about your comments related to Jared Kushner, and then we'll also bring up Meryl Streep. But Jared Kushner, who, of course, has announced that he will be acting as an advisor to the president, his father-in-law. What's the opinion?
Well, the opinion is, let me just read to you what Le Monde said of the Kushner affair. Mm-hmm. Trump may be abiding with the letter of the law, but not the spirit of the law. And that this appears to typify a man who sees the law as something to be circumvented.
Is this related to nepotism?
Something to be respected and protected.
Is this associated?
And the President of the United States should be concerned with respecting and protecting the law.
And what specific law are they referring to, just out of curiosity?
Well, the 1967 law, which says you cannot appoint someone to a senior job.
A cabinet position, not an advisory.
Exactly, but that's what they mean.
Well, but
that's what they mean by circumventing. He's not appointing him to the cabinet.
Well,
he's found a role for him which does not require Senate confirmation.
Such as Bill Clinton found for his wife, Hillary Clinton, with her efforts to establish some health care solution and her special committee on that. I find that interesting, and of course, it is directly related to cabinet appointments, not to special advisors. But okay, I find that they're convoluting the law, but we'll leave it at that. Let's talk about.
Well, I mean, it's like he won't really, in his speech today, he talked about, the American public aren't interested in his taxes. Well, I can tell you, I'm a member of the American public, even though I live here, and I'm very interested in seeing his tax returns. And it's a perfect example of, yes, he does not have to release his tax returns. There is no obligation, no legal obligation.
Other than you, and of course, you've just mentioned Le Monde, which of course is I wouldn't say it's the national newspaper of France, but maybe.
Well, a national newspaper.
A national newspaper of France. But it is interesting is that even the European press are delving into our Constitution. That is fascinating. And of course, this goes back to your observations earlier, Tom, that Europe sees the U.S. as a world leader. Very interesting in that. Let's talk about
he's a world leader. Well, and it is a world leader. It is the only superpower.
I'll tell you what, I want to get to Meryl Streep, but before we do that, let's go to a caller. We've got Dennis in Jacksonville joining us. Dennis, good evening. Tom Arms, of course, our guest this evening. Yes, sir.
And good evening. So I wanted to comment on a couple of things here that I find kind of interesting.
Uh-huh.
I love all the commentary about conflict of interest. There is such a complete misunderstanding of what conflict of interest is and how it even affects people. Conflict of interest is not something that you can get rid of. Conflict of interest happens constantly. I'm on several boards, and conflict of interest is something that it just so happens. The reason conflict of interest becomes a problem is if you vote or act upon that conflict of interest and you don't tell people that you have the conflict.
Okay.
You're even on all the boards I'm on, you actually can vote on something you have a conflict of interest on. However, you have to disclose it. It's only a problem when it is hidden and people don't know about it and you're acting in a manner you should not.
Okay.
So there's this whole thing that you can't have a conflict of interest. Yeah, you can. Lots of people have conflicts in all kinds of things they do.
Right.
Otherwise, what you limit yourself to are only people in government who have nothing. They have no interest. They have nothing going on. I think it's ridiculous to expect anybody who wants to run for office to eliminate any and all things that could be a conflict of interest, because then you get unsuccessful people who now are running your government.
All right.
It's kind of interesting to hear the commentary on it.
I want to go. Did you have anything else you wanted to add? Because I want to move on, but I think it's a very interesting observation.
Yeah, that was one of them there. I think the other is, as far as just perceptions of people, I actually loved and enjoyed watching this today, because what you have with a Donald Trump is this. The guy is going to say what he thinks, what he believes. You don't have to figure out what it is.
Right.
You don't have to figure he's going to say one thing and do another. You know where he stands.
We call
now,
that
what you can do.
We call that transparent.
You can either like it or not like it. But the fact is, you don't have to figure out where the guy stands.
Dennis, we call that transparency. So I think
Absolutely.
it's very. Thank you very much for your call. I appreciate that. Thanks again. Let me go back to our guest here, of course, Tom Arms of LookAheadNews.com and LookAhead Radio. Tom, let's talk quickly about Meryl Streep, because we've got so many other things. We got the Catalonian independence. I'm curious about that. We've got political jockeying in China, and then possibility of a pro-Russian being sworn as the Bulgarian president. There's so many interesting things. Let's talk about Meryl Streep and how her remarks were received, again, in Europe.
Oh, they loved it.
Really?
They loved it. Again, it was all over the Twitter sphere here.
Really?
They thought that basically it was a lot of truisms.
Well, okay.
And you cannot have a person in that position using the position to humiliate someone who can't really properly respond.
Okay,
it just
if
they do it, as Meryl Streep said, it encourages other people to do the same.
We're talking about the fact that he apparently was, shall we say, dismissive of a a journalist who suffers from certain physical challenges, and it was felt that he was being demeaning of him. All right, we're going to get back to other items here in just a moment. I just wanted to share that description for our audience who may not be aware of that particular aspect of Meryl Streep's remarks. The other one, of course, has to do with the issue of asylum seekers, but also immigrants, possibly legal and some possibly illegal. We're going to get to those and other issues here in just a moment with Look Ahead Radio host Tom Arms, and also the author of LookAheadNews.com. Check out that foreign affairs newsletter, LookAheadNews.com.
Look Ahead Radio will return in just a moment.
Quick, what do these sounds have in common? These are the sounds of geography. Geography helps us understand connections between people and places. But our kids aren't getting enough of it. Half can't locate Japan or India, and 20% can't even find the Pacific Ocean. So we created MyWonderfulWorld.org to give kids the power of global knowledge. Go to MyWonderfulWorld.org to learn more. It's a wonderful world.
We now return to Look Ahead Radio. Here is Lockwood Phillips.
Viewpoints around the world with Tom Arms. I'm always enjoying the conversations on Wednesdays, and I will say, Tom, that you challenge us, and I thank you very much for doing this. So getting a world's view of what's going on around the world, but also outside of the continental United States. We too often live in a bubble here in the U.S. I do have to say something to you, Tom. Ross and I were chatting briefly off air about the observations of the European press and the concerns that you've expressed on behalf of those you've spoken to in the UK. And of course, Tom lives in London and other areas around the world. And that is the concerns that you have related to the future of the United States and Donald Trump as president, which is just around the corner. The fascinating thing about this, Tom, is it really doesn't resonate with so many of us here in the States. And I wonder very quickly, does that in any way make European leaders uncomfortable that we just see it here in the States don't care?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
That's very interesting.
Well, first of all, I think you might be in a little bit of a bubble there in North Carolina too. I, as you know, do Look Ahead,
right,
and part of it is the Look Ahead report.
Right.
And I think there's going to be like 1 million or more people demonstrating on the streets in Washington next weekend.
I'm glad you brought that up. I have pontificated here, Tom, that if there is riot and if the transfer of authority and power on inauguration weekend is disrupted by rioters, I contend that the Democrats, the liberals, and the progressives own it, and they have no privilege and no right to do so. But I am curious, what is the opinion of the European community, particularly European community? If you can bring in the those from India or the Middle East or Africa, fine. But what is the opinion? Because that is one of the bellwethers of American politics, and that is the peaceful transference of power. Happens also in Great Britain as well. But back to you.
I agree. I agree with you that it is one of the bellwethers, and that's what's so worrying about these demonstrations, is that people do regard these as bellwethers, and they should be held sacred. And they are so angry that they are prepared to sacrifice that sanctity.
You know, it didn't happen. It did not happen.
I feel so strongly about it.
But
yes, it upsets me. Now, you're asking, how do people feel in Western Europe, as I said, and I want to bring in someone, one of the topics here. In Eastern Europe, there is among some countries, there is, especially southern Eastern Europe, mm-hmm. There are people who support Trump.
Right.
In Poland, the Czech Republic, Moldova, Bulgaria, they're supporting Trump.
Why?
Now,
why?
these countries are also starting to move closer to Russia. In Bulgaria on Sunday, there's going to be a new president, and he was voted on a pro-Putin platform, and he defeated the pro-EU candidate. Okay? And he's going to be sworn in on Sunday. He was elected on the same day as the new president of Moldova, a neighboring country, which was also voted in on a pro-Russian platform. And the reason is because Russia is gaining in power. These are small countries, and they can't afford, they have to be linked to one power bloc or another. And they see the Western power bloc becoming weaker.
Why is that?
Weaker because of the EU falling apart, because of Brexit, but also because the United States, in the form of Donald Trump, is not providing or not appearing to provide the support they used to.
But wait a second,
Tom.
Tom.
After themselves, and they're aligning themselves closer with the Russians.
Tom, wait a second. We're looking at the speculation going forward. Let's look at the past 8 years. There is indication that the United States has failed to fulfill its requirements, its treaties, its promises. The red line, for example, in Syria. These are issues that have, quite frankly, a telling impact. So you're saying that this is a result of the anticipated change in the United States?
In Europe, I would say that Obama has had in Europe, he's had pretty good foreign policy. He has, for instance, although there's been problems with Ukraine, he's backed them up. He's backed up the European Union as far as the Russians are concerned in the Ukraine. He has agreed to deploy a missile shield in Eastern Europe and all these things. These things are now being questioned by Donald Trump. It is looking forward. Obama has a very poor record, I think, in the Middle East. Absolutely atrocious in the Middle East.
Okay.
The Middle East is very, very important.
That's really where the rubber meets the road when it comes to the events of the day. All right. I find this fascinating. Tom Arms, again, of LookAhead Radio and LookAheadNews.com. Look Ahead News is his newsletter. Do log on to that. Take advantage of this. All right, Tom, we've got to move on to other issues. I find this fascinating, but they are going to be paying close attention to the inauguration, and I was fascinated by that as well. Let's look at the other issues in Europe, and you bring up Brexit, the European Union. I know that there's going to be a UN meeting in Paris next week, and what is the purpose of the meeting, and who's going to be in attendance?
It's going to be on Sunday, and John Kerry will be there. There's going to be 70 countries represented, and it's basically talk about the Arab-Israeli conflict.
Is there a chance that this may involve the designation of a state relationship with Palestine?
Now, I don't think anything's going to come out of it. For one thing, I think the Israelis are going to be conspicuous by their absence.
Okay.
They've already said that they probably won't go. Why should they go? I mean, you know, the goalposts are going to all be changing on the 20th of January. And Trump has already said that his policy towards Israel is going to be completely different from that of Obama and John Kerry. So, you know, why should he go? On top of that, 70 countries. Really, you can't get much done. Netanyahu said, what's the point of going to a conference with the 70 countries? You know, we can't agree on anything. The only thing they're going to agree on is probably another resolution attacking Israel. Okay,
we're going to get back to this. I just want to comment on this as we go to the break, Tom. It's really a pleasure to hear you. I enjoy the repartee that we experience on these conversational topics, but also I think this is important. What you are leading into as we prepare for the change, the transference of power here in the United States, known as the inauguration, is the reference and the opinion of Europe. And I think this is going to be very important. Coming up in the weeks ahead, you must stay tuned here to Viewpoints Around the World with Tom Arms, the most important part of our entire day here on Wednesdays on the talk station. And also, just to remind you about the newsletter, definitely sign up. No obligation, no money, but a great read and, yes, a listen. LookAheadNews.com. LookAheadNews.com.
Look Ahead Radio will return in just a moment.
Observations of an Expat by Tom Arms from LookAheadNews.com. And so it begins, or at least it will on Friday, January 20th, when Donald Trump stands on the steps of the U.S. Capitol building, places his hand on the Bible, and swears to protect and uphold the Constitution of the United States. The U.S. presidential inauguration is a celebration of American democracy and the peaceful transition from one administration to the next. There are parades, marching bands, waving flags, an inaugural ball, and a bevy of Hollywood stars. Not this time. Oh yes, all the above will occur as usual, but in addition, 1 million+ protesters are expected to descend on Washington, D.C. to politically disown the elected President of the United States. Not our president, they will shout. And all the indications are that the forthcoming inaugural weekend is a mere curtain raiser for the global thrills and spills to come. If you enjoy life on the edge, then you are living on the right planet at the right time. Let's look first at the wellhead, America and President Trump. Donald Trump enters the White House with an approval rating of 37%. The man he's replacing has an approval rating of 57%. No American president in modern history has assumed office under such a virulent barrage of vitriol that Trump is currently enduring. There is a veritable forest of question marks hanging over his character, abilities, even his right to govern. Is he a sexual predator? Why won't he release his tax returns? What is the role of his son-in-law? Has he properly divested himself of his business interests? Is he a threat to freedom of the press? Did his campaign staff work with the Russians? Is he Putin's poodle? What are the threats to NATO? What will happen to America's immigrant community? Taiwan, China, Jerusalem, North Korea, NATO, Ukraine, the Baltic states, NAFTA, Medicare and free trade. And finally, should a person who lost the popular vote by 2.5 million be taking the oath of office? The answer to the last question is yes. That is how the American electoral law works, and the law must be respected. The repercussions of the Trump victory are already evident beyond American shores. Earlier this week, a Chinese aircraft carrier led a flotilla through the Taiwan Straits. This deliberately provocative act caused the Taiwanese government to scramble a squadron of fighter aircraft. This Sunday, there's a long-planned major Middle East conference in Paris. 70 countries will be represented. Secretary of State John Kerry will be there. Conspicuous by his absence will be Benjamin Netanyahu. Why should the Israeli Prime Minister make concessions for peace when Donald Trump plans to move the American embassy to Jerusalem and is sending an ambassador to Israel who unreservedly supports Israeli West Bank settlements? There is another inauguration next weekend. Major General Rumen Radev will be sworn in as President of Bulgaria on Sunday. He was elected on a pro-Russian platform. So was Igor Dodon, President of neighboring Moldova. Both these victors are examples of the electorate's finely tuned instincts for political survival. Small countries need big countries as friends. Europe and America are waning. Russia is waxing. Big time. Finally, among the honored guests at the U.S. inauguration will be Nigel Farage, former leader of the far-right anti-EU, anti-immigration UK Independence Party, the man whom Donald Trump would love to see appointed British ambassador to the U.S. Last week, Marine Le Pen, leader of France's far-right National Front Party, was in New York. The day after the inauguration, the leaders of Europe's far-right anti-immigration parties will hold their first ever meeting. For years, these parties were dismissed as inconsequential. The election of Donald Trump has enabled, emboldened, and encouraged them. There is, however, a bright spark on the horizon. Also on the day after the inauguration, it is World Hug Day. The world needs a hug.
Welcome back to Look Ahead Radio. Here is Lockwood Phillips.
In spite of the fact that our guest this evening, or actually my co-host Tom Arms, says that I live in a bubble, well, I don't think I do. But I think it's important that we recognize we need to know what is happening around the world and get a feeling for the opinions and observations we're hearing from Tom Arms of LookAheadNews.com. That's LookAheadNews.com. Sign up for that newsletter. And, of course, you're listening to Look Ahead Radio here on the Talk Station and Talk Stations around the world. Tom, as always, thank you for being with us. This is a great conversation. Let's look at several quick items. We've got about 3 minutes to go. We were talking about the UN. Let's talk about another summit, a water summit in Abu Dhabi, to discuss clashes in Central Asia and Southeast Asia over water rights. We think about Abu Dhabi as a topic related to oil, but water?
Yep, they're having a big conference here starting on Monday. And I wanted to raise this because there really is possibly danger of military conflict in Central Asia over this.
I can believe it. Yes.
In the Himalayas are the source of so much water throughout Central Asia and South Asia and Southeast Asia. Right. And in particular, on the western slopes, the Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and so forth, the ones closest to the Himalayas, traditionally, when they were all part of the Soviet Union, they used to share the water quite easily. It was all organized by Moscow. Mm-hmm. Now they don't share. The ones who are closest to the sources are building dams, and they're becoming major hydroelectricity providers. And the ones further downstream are literally being turned into deserts.
Wow. That, we've heard this said that water could become the great crisis, not oil, but water. Very interesting.
And they're talking about possibility of some fighting over it in that area. And that is a very important part of the world. There's a lot of oil there. There are a lot of minerals, lithium, things like that. You don't want any disruption. On the other side of the Himalayas, you have China, which controls something like 55 rivers coming out of the Tibetan Plateau. Rivers that go into the Southeast Asia. The Mekong River, for instance, which we all know from the Vietnam War. And also the rivers down into Bangladesh and India. All the headwaters are controlled by China. These are being dammed up for hydroelectricity. They're also building industrial plants along them, which are polluting the rivers and carrying toxic waste further down, which is destroying crops.
Okay, that's taking place this Sunday. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to move on we've got about a minute to go. Very quickly, you mentioned China. We've got China, the Communist Party Congress meeting in October. What's happening?
It's a long way away, but, like America's just gone through its election year. China's having what I call its C-lection year.
Okay. Yep. They're selecting who their leaders are going to be. All right. That's underway. I've got to wrap it up because I want to find out about the World Hug Day. What?
The day after inauguration, it's World Hug Day.
I love it.
I think we should all get ready for it. We're talking about divided nation, divided world. 21st of January is World Hug Day. I suggest, Lockwood, that you and I and Ross down behind that glass wall, if we all get together and have a telephonic group hug to show people how it can be done. Are you ready?
I think we can work on that. We'll talk about that after the program. Tom Arms with us with LookAheadNews.com. I'm looking forward to that event. Tom Arms, also with Look Ahead Radio, but sign up for his newsletter, LookAheadNews.com. You've been, of course, listening to Viewpoints Around the World here on the Talk Station, FM 107, AM 1240.
Look Ahead Radio is a production of the Talk Station.